What is up? What is up, YouTube? Check this out, man. Hey, check it out without a doubt, man. Let's see what this bad boy is all about. You mean to tell me? Come on, man. Is it true? Come on. This dude did not go. Prison doctor confirms Diddy caught HIV in prison. Now, this might be just a story made up. I don't know. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. Y'all let Uncle Mike know. Help me out. Can y'all help me out on this research, man? Check it out. Diddy sitting in the corner. Is that Diddy? Is that a picture of him? You know what? Let's just get into the video. Look here. Y'all hit that subscribe button. Hit that bell, baby. I'm telling you, Uncle Mike gonna bring you some shit. We're gonna bring you the real shit. Look here, y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, man. Let's get into this bad boy. Let's check it out. Still in the Philippines, baby.
Hey there, viewers. Before we dive into this startling story, let me ask, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you? Share your details in the comments. Today's revelation comes straight from inside the prison where...
Y'all let me know in the comments where y'all watching from. Let me know where y'all from. We should put the intro on this joint. But anyway, hey, check it out. Here we go. Here we go.
Shocking details about Diddy's health have just been revealed. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Whispering Walls. Prison has its own rhythm, its own language. Every sound, every movement, every small shift in routine means something. A guard hesitating at a door, an inmate sitting in a different spot than usual. A whispered conversation in a shadowy corner. These are all messages if you know how to read them. And right now the message is clear. Something's wrong with Diddy. I first caught wind of it in the chow hall, where news spreads faster than the slop they serve. The voices were low, but I heard it. Something's up with him. The way people were talking, the way heads turned slightly in his direction, trying not to be obvious, told me it wasn't just regular gossip. This was something different. Diddy wasn't sitting where he usually sat. He had a way of commanding space, even in here. He moved like he still had control, still had power. But today he sat closer to the wall, away from the center of the room. It wasn't much, just a shift of a few feet, but in here, even a few feet means... I glanced at him as I moved past with my tray. He looked... different. I couldn't put my finger on it right away, but something was off. His skin didn't have that same glow, that same sweat-slicked shine it usually did. His hands, resting on the table, looked thinner. Veins stood out a little too much. I wasn't the only one noticing. A guy at the next table nudged his cellmate, jerking his chin toward Diddy. Nearly a month before recording this album, my co-host Paul and Karen. Yeah, the other dude muttered, barely moving his lips. Slow, like his body hurtin'. Their words sat heavy in my head. I had noticed it too. Diddy wasn't moving with his usual confidence. Normally, even when he was walking in cuffs, he had this swagger, this air like he still ran the place. Today, he moved carefully, stiffly, like he was trying to keep himself from wincing. It was subtle, but it was there, and in prison, subtle changes mean everything. The chow hall wasn't the only place the whispers were spreading. Later in the yard, I overheard another conversation near the weight benches. "Dude ain't right," someone was saying, shaking his head. "Swear to God, I seen his hands shaking. He trying to play it off, but I seen it." A third guy chimed in. "Man, y'all just reaching. He old, that's all. He getting up there. Knees probably bad from all that running around back in the day. They don't explain the way he look." The first guy shot back. "He ain't just old, he's sick. I know what sick look like." That's when it really clicked. People weren't just whispering because Diddy was off his game. They weren't just watching him because he wasn't acting like himself. They were watching him because they thought something was wrong with him. Physically wrong. And in here, that's a death sentence. There's an unspoken rule in prison. You show weakness and it gets used against you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually someone will find a way to exploit it. Diddy had a presence, a reputation. People still feared him, but fear doesn't last forever. Fear fades the moment people realize there's nothing left to be afraid of. I didn't see him much the next day, and that only made things worse. When someone disappears, even for a short time, it makes the rumors louder. People start filling in the blanks themselves. Ain't been eating right. I heard he been seeing medical more than usual.
Wow.
He was scared. He know he ain't gonna make it in here long. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into full-blown theories. Some said he had an infection, something minor. Others claimed he was faking an illness to try and get transferred to a better facility. And then there were the ones who thought it was something worse, something serious, something that wasn't going away. I didn't believe it at first. Diddy was still Diddy, right? Even in here, he had connections. He had money. And in prison, money can get you things. Better food, better treatment, better protection. But money couldn't change the way he looked. Money couldn't put the weight back in his face or stop the slight shake in his hands. Something was happening, and the worst part? He knew it too. That night, when I was heading back to my cell, I saw him again. He was standing near the front of the block talking to one of the COs, not in the loud, cocky way he used to. Quiet, low, almost like he was asking for something. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read the CO's body language. Annoyance, dismissiveness, like he'd heard it all before and didn't give a damn. Diddy's hands were in his pockets, his shoulders hunched forward just a little, a defensive posture, a man who wasn't used to being ignored. That's when I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. For the first time since he got locked up, Diddy wasn't the one in control. And in a place like this, that's how it all starts to fall apart. Chapter 2. The late-night hospital visit. The air inside MDC always felt thick after sundown. The noise from the day, shouting, doors slamming, feet shuffling down the halls, settled into something quieter but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that made you listen harder, made you more aware of the movements around you. At night, the prison had a way of making even the smallest things seem bigger. And that's exactly what happened the night Diddy disappeared. Prison staff let him live out. It was late, later than they usually move people. Transfers happened in the daylight under full protocol, with the usual noise, chains rattling, orders being shouted, inmates lined up and moved in plain sight. But this was different. It was quiet, too quiet. I was lying on my bunk, not really asleep, just drifting in that space between wakefulness and rest, when I heard it. The sound of shoes against concrete, but not the heavy boots of the night guards doing their usual rounds. This was different, lighter, purposeful, deliberate. I rolled over, pressing my head against the cold metal of the bed frame, straining to hear better. A door buzzed open, the mechanical whine breaking the silence. Then footsteps, more than one set. Voices, low and firm, speaking in clipped tones. I didn't recognize them, not the usual night shift. That's when I knew something was up. You learn to tell the difference between routine movements and something out of place. This wasn't routine. By the time I sat up, a few others had already noticed. There was a rustling, quiet but there. A few heads lifted from pillows, eyes peering between bars. Nobody wanted to make it obvious, but we were all watching, listening. Then I saw him. Diddy. His head was down, his hands cuffed in front of him, not behind, which was strange. Behind the back means transfer, front cuffs mean medical. But no one had said anything about medical transport tonight. I shifted to get a better look, but he wasn't making eye contact with anyone. His usual arrogance, that air of untouchability, gone. His face looked tight, drawn, like a man who knew something he didn't want to say out loud. The guards weren't rough with him, but they weren't exactly gentle either. They just moved him along, quick, efficient, no unnecessary pauses. That's how you knew they were trying to keep it quiet. No words, no explanations, just movement. The doors buzzed again, and just like that, he was gone. Nobody said anything at first. We just sat there in that heavy, pregnant silence, processing what we'd just seen. In here, you don't ask questions out loud. You wait, you listen, and you piece things together. But the questions were already swirling. Why the hell was he leaving this late? Why the secrecy? If it was really just a checkup, why not the prison infirmary? It didn't take long for the speculation to start. It never does. Whispers moved from cell to cell, passed like a relay race through bars and walls. I heard he's been sick. Maybe he's got something serious. Nah, man, he's plain sick, trying to get out of here. The official explanation, when it finally made its way down to us, was simple. An MRI, a routine scan for an old knee injury. Nobody bought it. People in here aren't stupid. We've all seen inmates with worse injuries, worse conditions, and they never get taken out in the middle of the night under silent escort. They get ibuprofen and told to suck it up. And even if he did have a knee injury, why the cloak and dagger routine? Why not just take him during normal hours? By morning, the whole block was buzzing. The night before, it had been whispers, cautious speculation. Now it was a full-blown storm of theories. Some guys swore up and down that Diddy looked frail when they took him out, that his shoulders were smaller, his face more sunken in. Others claimed they'd seen his hands shake when he picked up his food tray earlier that day. Then there were the guys who were dead set on the idea that this was part of some legal strategy, that he was trying to make himself look weak, sick, unfit for prison so he could argue for house arrest. The stories built on each other, twisting, overlapping, changing with each retelling. But at the
house arrest, that's a stretch. That's way too much of a stretch. Wow.
Then there were the guys who were dead set on the idea that this was part of some legal strategy, that he was trying to make himself look weak, sick, unfit for prison so he could argue for house arrest. The stories built on each other, twisting, overlapping, changing with each retelling, but at the core of all of them was one truth. Diddy was not the same. By the time he was brought back later that morning, the shift in energy was undeniable. The COs were tight-lipped, their expressions neutral, but not quite neutral enough. You could see it in the way they avoided looking at him too long, the way they didn't joke around like they usually did, the way they kept a little more distance than necessary. And Diddy? He looked different, tired, drained. Almost like whatever happened at that hospital had taken something out of him. He wasn't talking, not even to the guys he usually spoke to. He just went straight to his cell, lay down on his bunk, and turned his back to the world. That's when the rumors really started. Chapter 3. The first signs of something worse. Something had shifted. It wasn't just the rumors anymore. It was in the way Diddy carried himself, in the space he took up, or rather, the space he didn't take up. He had always had a presence, even behind these walls, even in cuffs, even when stripped of everything that had once made him powerful. He was used to moving through the prison with a certain energy, a confidence that came from years of people bending to his will. But now, that energy was gone. The days that followed his late-night hospital trip were quiet in a way that made people uneasy. It wasn't normal for him to keep to himself. He had always been someone who made himself seen, even if he wasn't talking. He had a way of positioning himself, making sure people were aware of his presence, like a man who still believed his name carried weight. But now, he was shrinking. At first, the change was subtle. He stopped going to the yard as much, stopped sitting at the tables he normally sat at. He had always been selective about who he spoke to, but now, he barely spoke at all. When he did, it was short, clipped, lacking that smooth, almost rehearsed quality he used to have. Some of the younger inmates, the ones who weren't around when he first came in, didn't see the difference. But the ones who had been here longer, they noticed. By the end of the first week, there was no denying it. Diddy was losing weight, not the kind of weight that comes from skipping a meal here and there, but the kind that happens when something is eating at you. His jumpsuit looked looser, the fabric bunching at the shoulders and waist where it hadn't before. His cheekbones were more pronounced, his skin just a little duller. He wasn't sickly looking, not yet, but he wasn't the same. The ones who weren't paying close attention wrote it off as stress. It made sense. His whole world had crumbled in the span of a few months. He had gone from private jets, penthouses, and power to steel bunks, timed meals, and guards who didn't care who he was. That would be enough to shake anyone. But for the ones who were really watching, the ones who had been around sick men before, who had seen bodies deteriorate inside these walls, they saw something different. It was in the way he moved. Diddy had always carried himself like a man who still had control. Even when the rumors started, even when the trial dates were set and the media was eating him alive, he still walked like someone who thought he had a way out. Now, his steps were slower, more measured. It was like he was hyper-aware of his own body, of how much effort it took just to move from one place to another. One day in the chow hall, I saw him sitting alone, something that almost never happened. He had always had people around him, not friends, but people who stuck close enough to be useful. But now, no one sat with him. Whether it was his choice or theirs, I didn't know. He was picking at his food, barely eating. His hands were resting on the table, and I could see them tremble, just a little every now and then. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. When he realized people were looking, he pulled them into his lap. A guy at a nearby table snorted, "Dude," acting like he got something. His cellmate, an older guy who had been inside for almost 15 years, shook his head. "That ain't acting." That's when I realized this wasn't just gossip anymore. People were starting to believe it. It got worse after that. Diddy stopped touching things directly, using his sleeves to open doors, to press against surfaces. He started drinking only from sealed bottles, avoiding the communal fountain. He washed his hands more than usual, sometimes even wiping them on the inside of his shirt after shaking hands with a guard or an inmate. Some guys laughed it off. "Man, he think he too good for us. Nah, he just trying to look sick for the courts." Others weren't laughing. They had seen this before. I remember one guy, a lifer who had been in and out of different prisons over the years, leaning against the wall one afternoon while Diddy walked past. He watched him go, shaking his head slightly. "You ever seen a man start fading before?" He asked no one in particular. "That's what it looks like." Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to. The next week, Diddy stopped showing up to certain things altogether. He skipped rec time, skipped meals. One night, when the COs were doing their rounds, I caught a glimpse into his cell. He was just lying there, staring at the ceiling. Not asleep, not reading, not watching TV, just lying still, like he didn't have the energy to do anything else. That was when the first real theory took hold. Not that he was just sick, not that he was faking it, but that he had something. Something that wasn't going away. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into something heavier, something almost certain. "You know what it is, right?" "Nah, but I know what it looks like." "Ain't no way." "I'm telling you, I seen it before." It was spreading, the belief, the certainty. Diddy had something. And if that was true, then it was only a matter of time before everyone knew exactly what it was. Chapter 4. Inmate speculations and dark allegations. Rumors in prison don't just spread, they mutate. They start as whispers, uncertain and half-formed, but before long they take on a life of their own, shifting, growing, twisting into something bigger than they started. In here, stories aren't just told, they're believed, because belief, that's power. And right now, the most powerful thing moving through the walls of MDC wasn't Diddy himself. It was the idea that something was seriously wrong with him. It started small, the kind of thing you hear in passing and don't think much of at first. A murmur between two guys in the yard, a knowing look exchanged between cellmates. "You seen how he moving?" Dude, don't look right. Maybe it's stress. Nah, it's something else. The conversations always started vague, harmless, but the way people spoke about it, the way their voices dropped just slightly, told you everything you needed to know. And then, one afternoon, someone finally said it out loud. You think he got it? It was just a question, thrown out casually at first, the kind of thing someone says to test the waters, to see how it lands. Nobody reacted right away, but the silence that followed, that said more than words ever could. Nobody laughed. Nobody shut it down. That's when it became real. Because in prison, things only become real once people start believing them. The name for it came soon after. HIV. At first it was whispered, half a joke, half a dare, but the second time, the third, the 10th, it wasn't a joke anymore. Someone claimed they overheard a nurse talking about his medical file. Another swore a CO let it slip that Diddy had been prescribed something most inmates don't get access to. A guy in the laundry room said he saw one of Diddy's shirts come through with blood on the collar, like he'd been coughing into it. The stories weren't just growing, they were gaining traction. I knew it had officially taken hold when I heard two older inmates, guys who had been locked up long enough to know the difference between real prison gossip and nonsense, talking about it in the common area. Been eating? That's how it starts. Could be stress. Could be, but stress don't make you lose weight that fast. It don't. That was it. That was all they said. But the weight of it, the certainty in their voices, made my stomach twist. Because when guys like that started believing something, it was as good as fact. Word spread fast, too fast. By the next morning, the air inside the block had shifted. It wasn't just that people were talking, it was that they were acting differently. The ones who used to sit with Diddy at meals, they stopped. The ones who used to dap him up even in passing, they weren't touching him anymore. And Diddy noticed. He wasn't stupid. He could feel the energy shift. You could see it in the way he carried himself. A little more guarded, a little more aware of how much space he was taking up. He wasn't talking as much, wasn't looking people in the eye the way he used to. And when someone walked by him, brushing just a little too close, I saw the way his body tensed for half a second. That's the thing about a place like this. You don't have to be told when you're being watched. You just feel it. The people who still talked to him started doing it in hushed tones, like they didn't want to be seen with him. Some guys weren't even subtle about it. I saw one dude get up from a table when Diddy sat down, shaking his head as he walked away. Another flat out refused to take a cigarette from him. And then, the final confirmation that the rumor had taken hold. The guards. Guards don't get involved in inmate business, not directly. They see everything, hear everything, but they don't act on it unless it becomes a problem for them. Which is why I noticed the way they were treating Diddy now. The change was small, almost imperceptible to someone who wasn't looking, but I was looking. When he handed off his food tray, the CO took it like it was contaminated, holding it with just his fingertips before sliding it down to the next guy. When they did searches, they barely touched his bed, his things, like they didn't want to get too close. And Diddy, he saw it too. That's when the paranoia kicked in. The next time I passed by his cell, he was sitting on the edge of his bunk, hands clasped, his knee bouncing. He wasn't relaxed. This was a man who had spent years cultivating an image of control, a man who had built an empire on being untouchable. And now he looked like he was waiting for something bad to happen. In here, perception is reality. It doesn't matter if something is true or not. Once enough people believe it, it might as well be. And right now, people believed Diddy had HIV. By the time the next week rolled around, the rumors had turned into something darker. They weren't just talking about him being sick anymore. They were talking about how he got sick. And that's where things got really dangerous. Because once inmates start speculating about the how, that's when stories turn into accusations. And accusations? They get people killed. Chapter 5, The Doctor's Slip-Up. The prison infirmary was one of the few places inside MDC that had a different kind of atmosphere. It wasn't loud like the yard or tense like the mess hall. It was quieter, sterile in a way that didn't make you feel clean, just exposed. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat and sickness. The hum of old fluorescent lights overhead made everything feel colder than it already was. Diddy had been spending more time there lately, that much was obvious. It started with short visits, ones that weren't officially noted anywhere but were noticed by the inmates who paid attention. Then they got longer. He would disappear for an hour or two and come back looking drained, sometimes rubbing his arms where blood had been drawn, sometimes walking a little slower than before. The pattern was too frequent to ignore. But what sealed it? What turned whispers into certainty? It was a mistake. A small, careless mistake from someone who should have known better. It happened in the late afternoon, when the infirmary was busier than usual. A couple of inmates were lined up, waiting for their turn to see the medical staff. A few were faking it, guys looking for a way to get out of their cells for a bit, maybe hoping to score some meds. Others were there for real reasons, wounds that hadn't healed right, fevers that wouldn't go away. Diddy was there too, sitting off to the side, hands resting in his lap, staring at the floor. He wasn't talking, wasn't making a scene, just waiting. But waiting for what? That was the question everyone wanted an answer to. Near the back of the room, a nurse was talking to a doctor. Normally, those conversations didn't mean much to the inmates, just medical jargon, numbers, paperwork. But this time it was different. The doctor was flipping through a file, shaking his head slightly. He looked tired, overwhelmed. Maybe that's why he slipped. Maybe that's why he said what he said without thinking about who was in earshot. He's gonna need more tests. His numbers are still high. The nurse, glancing over, lowered her voice. "You think it's that?" The doctor exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. "I don't know. But if it is, then he's known for a while." That was it, that was all it took. The words weren't meant for anyone but the nurse. They weren't loud, they weren't clear, but they were enough. Enough for the wrong person to hear. One of the inmates sitting nearby, waiting for his own appointment, froze mid-sentence. His head tilted slightly, just enough to catch more of what was being said without making it obvious he was listening. He didn't react right away. That's how you know someone just heard something dangerous. They don't react.
You're right about that. Yeah.
And then, without making a scene, he got up, walked out of the infirmary, back to the unit. By the time he got there, he had already figured out how he was going to tell the story. Not the way he actually heard it. No, that wouldn't be enough. He had to make it bigger, more concrete. The words HIV and Diddy had never been spoken together in that infirmary. But by the time the story made its way around the block, it might as well have been written in the official records. "It's confirmed Diddy got it," doctor said it himself. That's how it works in here. The second someone says something with enough confidence, with the right kind of certainty, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's true now. By the time Diddy came back from the infirmary, the entire unit was waiting for him. Not physically, not gathered in some obvious way, but they were watching. Eyes followed him as he walked back to his cell. Conversations died out when he passed, the same way you'd watch a man walking into his own grave. He must have felt it, the shift, the way the air had changed, how his world, already crumbling, had just collapsed even further. For the first time, Diddy wasn't just an inmate, he was a sick inmate. And in here, that's worse than anything else. The thing about rumors in prison is that they aren't just words, they turn into actions. People had already been keeping their distance from him, but now it was obvious. At dinner, nobody sat near him. He walked into the mess hall, tray in hand, scanning the room, looking for an open spot. There were plenty of seats, there always were, but nobody made room, nobody invited him over. One guy, an old head who usually didn't get involved in prison politics, took it a step further. Diddy sat at the table across from him, not even looking up, just eating in silence. The old man set his tray down, pushed his chair back, and left without saying a word. Didn't even take his food with him. That was when Diddy realized it was over. Later that night, I caught sight of him again. He was standing at the sink, washing his hands. Not just once, not just a quick rinse, over and over. The soap had already lathered up, rinsed off, and lathered again. He kept scrubbing, his hands moving under the water in slow, methodical circles. It was like he was trying to wash something off of him that he couldn't see. When he finally stopped, he looked at himself in the tiny, scratched-up mirror above the sink. Just stood there, staring at his own reflection, his shoulders slumped forward. I had never seen him look like that before. Not angry, not powerful, not even afraid. Just empty. Word spread beyond the unit after that. The inmates working laundry said the COs were talking about it. Guys in different blocks were asking questions. Is it true? You think he really got it? And just like that, the story wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a fact. And once something becomes a fact in prison, it never goes away. The thing about paranoia is that once it settles in, it never leaves. It clings to you, wraps around your thoughts like vines, twisting everything into something darker, something heavier. In a place like MDC, paranoia isn't just an inconvenience, it's survival. You have to know when people are talking about you. You have to know when things are shifting, because if you don't, you won't last long. Diddy had always been the one watching. He had always been the one in control. Even in here, when the guards were the ones holding the keys, when his name no longer carried the weight it used to, he still moved like he had power, like he was untouchable. But now, that was gone. Now he was the one being watched. It started with the whispers. At first, they were just words. Low murmurs passed between inmates in the yard, over trays in the mess hall, behind cell doors late at night. Nothing direct, just talk. But talk in prison has a way of turning into something more. Diddy felt it before he heard it. The tension in the air, the way conversations dropped off when he walked past. How people looked at him, not with fear, not with respect, but with something else, something close to disgust. He wanted to believe it was just in his head, that it was all rumors, nothing more. But paranoia doesn't let you believe in logic. One afternoon in the common area, he caught a group of guys talking in hushed tones at a table near the back. He couldn't hear the words, but the way their eyes flicked toward him, the way one of them shook his head slightly, muttering something under his breath. He knew it was about him. That night, when the block was quiet, he sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor, his mind racing. Who started it? Who was spreading it? Was it intentional? His head swam with possibilities. Someone inside, a guard, a lawyer leaking something to the outside world. Then the worst thought hit him. What if this wasn't just a rumor? What if someone was making sure it became real? From that moment, everything changed. He started avoiding certain areas. He stopped sitting in the common rooms, stopped taking his meals at the same tables. He started keeping his back to the wall, scanning the room every time he walked in. It was subtle, but noticeable. The thing is, in prison, people notice everything. The way you eat, the way you walk, where you sit, who you talk to. They noticed the way Diddy stopped using the water fountains, how he started asking for sealed bottles whenever he could get them, how he wiped his hands on his pants after touching the doors. At first, they laughed. Man, what's he so scared of? Dude acting like we gon' breathe on him wrong. But then, the laughing stopped. Because now, it wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was something else, something that even Diddy seemed to believe. The paranoia wasn't just about the other inmates, it was about the outside world. He knew the media was waiting, ready to rip him apart even more than they already had. Every day new stories were coming out. More women, more allegations, more details about the case that the prosecutors were building against him. But this was different. If this got out, If people started believing he was actually sick, that he had HIV, it was over. Not just his freedom, his entire legacy. That's when he started asking questions. He pulled one of the guards aside, trying to be casual. "Y'all hear anything about me outside?" The CO didn't even look at him. "I don't keep up with that celebrity shit." Diddy nodded, acting like he didn't care, but inside, he felt it, the shift, the loss of control. That night, he stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, playing it all back in his head. When did it start? Who started it? Was it one of the inmates? A doctor? The damn guards? He thought about his last few visits to the infirmary, the way the doctor had looked at him, the way the nurses had spoken in hushed tones. Had they leaked something? Or was this all just a game? The next day, he started testing people, watching their reactions, throwing out little comments to see what stuck. At breakfast, he leaned over to a guy sitting across from him, someone who used to talk to him more before all this started. Man, you ever notice how people start acting different when they scared of something? The guy barely looked up from his tray.
Damn
"What you
straight,
mean?"
damn
Diddy
straight.
shrugged, playing it off. "Just saying, people love rumors in here. Ain't always real, though." The guy didn't answer, just kept eating. That told Diddy everything he needed to know. They already believed it. The paranoia only got worse after that. Diddy stopped touching the railings, stopped using the shared weights in the yard. He kept his distance, stood a little further from people than he used to. The problem was, the more he pulled away, the more they whispered. "Man, look at him, he acting weird as hell. I told you, he know he got something." And that was the final blow. Because in prison, the worst thing you can do is prove the rumors right. The next morning, he sat on his bunk, staring at the wall. He looked smaller than before, his jumpsuit looser, his face more hollow. His hands were clasped in front of him, his fingers tapping against each other, a nervous habit he probably didn't even notice. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one controlling the narrative. And that was the worst part of all. Chapter 7. The guards know, too. Diddy had spent his entire life reading the room. It was how he built his empire, how he stayed ahead, how he knew when to press harder and when to pull back. Power, after all, wasn't just about what you had. It was about what people thought you had. And for years he had people convinced that he was untouchable. But inside these walls, that power was gone. At first it was just the inmates, the whispers, the stares, the way people started shifting away from him, giving him more space than usual. But now, it was the guards. That's when he knew it was real. Because the guards don't react to rumors. They see inmates pass around fake stories all the time, and unless it causes a direct problem, they don't care. They're paid to keep order, not to entertain gossip. But this was different. The first time Diddy noticed it was during morning roll call. Normally, the guards just ran through the list, barely making eye contact. But today, one of them, 𝗗𝗓𝗡𝗞𝗦, took just a little too long looking at him. Not a direct stare, not outright hostility, but something colder, something that wasn't there before. Diddy kept his face neutral, but inside, he felt it, that shift. That realization that his reputation wasn't just changing among the inmates, it was changing with the people who controlled his every movement. Later that day, he was in the mess hall when it happened again. He went to pick up his tray like he always did, standing in the slow-moving line, listening to the usual background noise of guys talking, laughing, arguing. Then, just as the guard working the line handed him his tray, Diddy caught the flicker of hesitation. It was small, barely noticeable. A brief pause before the CO extended the tray all the way forward, the guard's fingers gripping the edge just a little too tightly, as if debating whether to drop it entirely. Diddy took it, moving to his usual spot, but he wasn't even thinking about the food anymore. That hesitation, that moment of doubt, told him everything. They weren't just watching him now. They were judging him. And then came the moment that made it undeniable. It was that young CO, the one who never used to pay Diddy any attention, never had a reason to. Just another uniform, another guy doing his job, moving through the routine of the day. But that afternoon, as he passed by Diddy's cell during his rounds, he made sure to speak just loud enough to be heard. "Gotta start wearing gloves when I handle his shit." It wasn't directed at anyone in particular. It was muttered, casual, almost like a joke, but Diddy caught it immediately. His head snapped up, and for a brief second he locked eyes with the CO. The younger man didn't flinch. He just smirked, as if daring Diddy to say something, to react, to do anything. Diddy didn't. Because what could he do? Inmates talk. They spread rumors. They lie. They embellish. But guards don't make jokes unless they mean them. That's when he realized. The sickness might still be a rumor, but his reputation, it was infected. After that, the shift became impossible to ignore. Diddy started noticing little things. The way the guards stood slightly further away from him during searches, how they took extra care not to touch him unless absolutely necessary. He saw the way their eyes followed him, their expressions unreadable, but their body language saying everything. And then there were the ones who looked at him with something else. Not disgust, not caution. Pity. That was the worst part. Because disgust meant they still saw him as a threat, as something to be wary of. But pity, that meant they saw him as nothing. A dying man, a waste. And the thing about prison, once the guards start treating you like you don't matter, the inmates follow. The next day Diddy tested it. He had always been careful with how he moved inside. He knew who to acknowledge, who to ignore. But today he wanted to see how deep it went. In the yard, he walked to one of the water stations, standing near a group of COs on break. Normally they wouldn't care. Diddy wasn't the type to start trouble, and as long as an inmate wasn't stepping out of line, guards didn't pay them much attention. But this time, he saw it. The way one of them shifted slightly. Not much, just a half step to the side, but enough. Enough to say, don't get too close. Diddy let the water run into his cup, took a slow sip, then set it down and walked away. His heart was pounding, but his face gave nothing away. They were afraid of him, not because of what he could do, but because of what they thought he had. That night, when Diddy returned to his cell, he sat on the edge of his bunk and ran his hands over his face. His mind wouldn't stop racing. Had this been the plan all along, to turn everyone against him? He thought back to the doctor's mistake, the careless words in the infirmary, the way the inmates had twisted them. And now the guards. Diddy knew how power worked. It wasn't about what was true, it was about what people believed was true. And right now, everyone believed he was dying. It didn't even matter if he was or not. The moment they stop fearing you, the moment they stop caring about you, you're already dead. And Diddy? He was starting to wonder if this place was going to kill him before the trial even started. Chapter 8. The press gets wind of it. Diddy had spent his entire life controlling the narrative. Every scandal, every accusation, every headline. He had always found a way to spin it, bury it, or distract the public with something bigger. He understood how the media worked better than anyone. He had manipulated it, played it, used it to his advantage for decades. But in here, he had no control. The whispers that started in prison had stayed inside the walls for a while, but nothing stays hidden forever, especially when it involves someone like Diddy. His name still carried weight in the outside world, and when people caught wind that something might be wrong with him, they didn't ask for proof. They just ran with it. It started with a blog post, some low-tier gossip site, the kind that usually reported on reality stars and influencers, but every now and then landed a real scoop. They didn't claim to know anything for sure, but they didn't have to. Sources say Diddy's health in question amid secret hospital visit. The moment the headline hit the internet, it was over. People didn't need facts, they just needed a seed of doubt. Within hours, the post had been picked up by bigger outlets. TMZ, The Shade Room, even mainstream sites that usually didn't touch celebrity gossip were running their own versions of the story, all careful with their wording, all saying the same thing in different ways. Concerns mount over Diddy's well-being following late-night medical transport. What's really going on with Diddy's health? The internet ate it up. Social media went into a frenzy. Twitter was flooded with theories, speculation, jokes, and outright misinformation. Some people swore they had inside sources saying Diddy had been sick for years and had kept it hidden. Others claimed they knew exactly what was wrong with him, despite no actual evidence. And then there were the people who just wanted to watch the spectacle. Diddy getting that karma package delivered. First the allegations, now this? Oh yeah, God got the final say. Diddy out here playing GTA in real life and just hit 5 stars. The comments were ruthless. People didn't care if it was true or not. They wanted a show. They wanted to see a man who had once been untouchable brought down to nothing. And the worst part? Diddy couldn't respond. Inside, he didn't even know it was happening at first. Prison didn't move at the speed of the internet. There were no phones, no instant notifications. By the time he heard about it, the story was already everywhere. It was one of the COs who let it slip. Diddy had been sitting in the common area, staring at the wall when 2 guards walked past, talking just a little too loud. You see that shit online, they saying he's sick. Yeah, I saw. Ain't surprising. Diddy's head snapped up, but the guards kept walking, not even looking at him. They hadn't said his name, but he knew. A few hours later, he got confirmation. One of the other inmates, a guy who worked in the laundry room and had occasional access to a radio, leaned over as Diddy passed by and muttered, "Yo, they talking about you on the outside." Diddy stopped. "What you mean?" The guy smirked. "They saying you sick, man. That's what they saying." For the first time since the rumors had started, Diddy felt real fear. Inside, it had been bad enough. The whispers, the stares, the way people kept their distance. But the outside world, that was a different beast entirely. Inside, rumors were dangerous. Outside, they were permanent. If people believed he was sick, really sick, it didn't matter if it was true or not. It would be true in their minds. He paced his cell that night, running through every possible way this could have happened. Who leaked it? How did it get out? Was it someone inside? A guard? The medical staff? He had always had enemies, but this felt different. This wasn't just a hit to his reputation. This was career-ending. The next day, he tried to get word to his lawyers. He needed to know what was being said, how bad it had gotten, what could be done. But when he was finally able to make a call, the damage control had already started. His legal team was scrambling. "It's all speculation, but it's picking up traction fast. We're getting calls from reporters. People want to know if it's true." Diddy clenched his jaw. "And what are you telling them?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Too long of a pause. "You're denying everything, but your silence isn't helping." Diddy felt his stomach twist. His silence, that's what was making it worse. Because in the world he had once ruled, silence meant guilt. The more he refused to respond, the more people would assume it was true. But what could he say? If he came out and denied it, people would just say he was lying. If he ignored it, the rumors would grow. For the first time in his life, Diddy was losing the battle before he even got a chance to fight. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, listening to the sounds of the prison around him. The occasional cough from down the hall, the distant clang of metal doors, the low hum of a CO's radio as they walked by. He thought about everything he had built, everything he had fought to protect, and how all of it could be wiped away by a single rumor. Because that's the thing about perception. Once the world believes something, it doesn't matter what the truth is. Diddy had spent his entire life making people believe he was untouchable. And now, They believed he was done.
Wow. That's an interesting story, man. Y'all let me know. First of all, I want to say if you are ender, meaning that you made it to the end, you hear my voice right now, I want you to say in the comments that you are a ender. You are help supporting the channel to the utmost. If you watch the video from beginning to end, this video was over 50 minutes long. So if you are a ender, and Diddy, man, does Diddy really have HIV? Because if he does, I don't think he caught it in jail, man. But it's an interesting story. But I know one thing, he went and did something so he could see that daggone music award. So he went somewhere to do some type of CAT scan or something, so he could be in the hospital so he could watch the awards. Look here, I'm gonna get on up out of here. Don't forget, put in the comments that you are ender. Y'all take it light, take it slow. Tell them Uncle Mike told you so. Peace out.